Get $3 off every order at PlayAsia by using the code CENSORED.
What do Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Michelangelo, as well as Selphie from the RPG video game Final Fantasy VIII all have in common? And the answer to that is that they, along with many other fictional media from the 70s, 80s and 90s, have all been depicted using certain ninja-based weapons such as Nunchaku. Bruce Lee has wielded Nunchaku in many of his movies, including as shown here 1973's Enter the Dragon. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Michelangelo on the other hand has them as his trademark weapon, and is normally seen using them during combat in all Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles media. Final Fantasy VIII Selphie is also a fan of the sticks tied to a rope weapon, with their entire weaponry arsenal being based around items of this nature. However, another thing that they all have in common is that these weapons had to then be censored out of the UK versions, along with lots of other games, movies and TV shows that showed similar types of weaponry. The trouble all began in the early 70s, where martial arts movies such as those by Bruce Lee were starting to heavily rise in popularity. At this point in time, it wasn't that unusual for the BBFC, otherwise known as the British Board of Film Classification, to demand that certain movies be censored before being released. For example, if the violence was seen as too extreme, or could potentially lead to real life consequences. So, when Enter the Dragon was submitted for a classification in 1973, it was given the max X rating, yet still had to have various scenes involving violence toned down. However, all instances of nunchaku use were actually left intact, but that's something which would quickly change. You see, with the rise in popularity of these movies, the weapons used in them had started to be used by British gangs in the streets of the UK. This led to controversy within the British public over whether the movies were to blame for this, and whether this should be allowed. Then in 1975, 2 years after the Enter the Dragon's release, the BBFC director James Furman announced that they would now be banning any usage of nunchaku, no matter how they are used or what they are used in. Additionally, this ban also specified that Shuriken will face the same restrictions. Shuriken are commonly known in the West as throwing stars or ninja stars. This means that for many years following this, you wouldn't be able to see any of these weapons in UK movies and other products submitted to the BBFC, with the hope that this would lead to them no longer being used by gangs. Additionally, up until 2012, the BBFC also rated many of the UK's video games, meaning that gaming was also heavily affected by the ban. One piece of media seriously affected by the restrictions was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The franchise had become extremely popular in the late 80s, owing to the success of things like the TV show, which turned the series' Turtle cast into worldwide stars. However, there was a big issue as one of the main characters used nunchaku as their trademark weapon, and they used them in nearly every episode. This resulted in large amounts of edits having to be made to the UK version to cut out any scenes showing this weapon. Additionally, this also had the knock-on effect of also affecting certain other European regions. In fact, the UK censorship was so strict that even a scene showing sausages being comedically used in a manner similar to nunchaku had to be cut in the UK version of the Turtles' second feature film. The trouble got so bad that in later episodes of the TV show, Michelangelo stopped using their trademark weapon worldwide, and this was instead replaced with a grappling hook type of device. The BBFC did however ease up on their restrictions eventually, with them in 1991 stating that they would make certain exceptions, such as when the weapon usage is only brief. However, even with this exception, most content would still not be allowed. The 90s saw many video games affected by this ban, one notable example being the Tenchu series, which is a game franchise based around being a ninja. Unsurprisingly, one of the ninja weapons you can use in the game is Shuriken. This though, of course, had to be removed in the UK, despite being rated 18+ by the BBFC, and so over in the UK they were replaced by throwing knives instead. Another game that saw Shuriken removed in the UK is Shadow Warrior, a FPS released in 1997 that was again based around being a ninja. As you can see here, in the rest of the world you could use Shuriken to attack enemies from a distance. However, for the UK version, these had to be replaced with darts. The BBFC though didn't rate all games released in the UK, and a BBFC rating was only needed for titles that were seen as being more graphic in nature. But for less graphic titles like Final Fantasy VIII shown here, these were instead rated by an organisation called ELSPA. It also seems that ELSPA decided to stick to the BBFC's guidelines on these weapons, as various ELSPA games continued with the censorship, including Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII is a rather odd case though, as Selphie, one of the game's main playable characters, still uses her nunchaku weapons during battle, which should have been a big issue. The weapons were still censored in the UK version however, but not in terms of their appearance but the way they are described. You see, all mention of them actually being nunchaku was removed, and over in the UK they are now called shinobo, which is Japanese for sticks of death. There are many other examples of these changes happening to games, movies and other media. However, over time the BBFC's original reasoning behind the ban became out of date. No longer were British gangs wielding ninja-like weapons, instead a much bigger controversy had begun to grow over weapons that were much easier to use, such as knives. And so in 1999, and following being in effect for over 20 years, the BBFC finally announced that they would be removing the ban and instead focusing their efforts on a more contextual based approach, which disallows emphasis and glamorization of realistic, contemporary and easily obtainable weapons, but didn't automatically ban anything. This then paved the way for titles to finally be released in the UK uncut for the first time, such as Enter the Dragon in the year 2000. However, on the flip side, the tougher stance on knives saw movies like Lara Croft Tomb Raider having to be censored the following year due to what was described as glamorization of knives in a film aimed at young teenagers. The early 2000s though are still quite a long time ago now, and fast forwarding things all the way to the present, and generally speaking, the BBFC is now much more relaxed. They also no longer rate games, with this responsibility being given to PEGI, the video game rating system for most other parts of Europe as well. However, with this having such major effects for such a long period of time, this was felt as something that Censored Gaming should definitely take a look at. Until next time, thank you for watching.